Chapter 1. Dr. Shepherd at the breakfast table. Mrs. Ferrars died on the night of the 16th of September, a Thursday. I was sent for at 8 o'clock on the Friday morning, and a few minutes after 9 I reached home again. "Is that you, James?" my sister Caroline called. "Come and get your breakfast." I walked into the dining room. "You've had an early call?" "Yes," I said. "King's Paddock, Mrs. Ferrars." "I know. Annie told me." Annie is our maid. "Well?" my sister demanded. "A sad business. She must have died in her sleep." "I know," said my sister again. "I didn't know myself until I got there. If Annie knows, it was the milkman who told me. The Ferrars cook told him. What did she die of?" "She died of an overdose of Veronal. She's been taking it for sleeplessness. She must have taken too much." "No," said Caroline. "She took it on purpose. I told you she poisoned her husband, and ever since she's been haunted by what she did." I told Caroline that her whole idea was nonsense. "Nonsense?" said Caroline. "I'm sure she's left a letter confessing everything." "She didn't leave a letter," I said sharply. "Oh," said Caroline. "So you did inquire about that, did you?" Chapter 2. Who's Who in King's Abbot. There are only two houses of any importance in King's Abbot. One is King's Paddock, left to Mrs. Ferrars by her husband. The other, Fernley Park, is owned by Roger Ackroyd, an extremely successful businessman of nearly 50 years of age. He gives generously to village activities, though he is said to be extremely mean in personal spending. When he was just 21, Ackroyd married a beautiful widow, Mrs. Peyton, who had one child, Ralph. Sadly, Mrs. Ackroyd was an alcoholic and drank herself to death. Ralph, now 25, has been a continual source of trouble to Ackroyd. However, we are all very fond of Ralph in King's Abbot. After her husband's death, Ackroyd and Mrs. Ferrars were always seen together, and it was thought that at the end of a period of mourning, Mrs. Ferrars would become Mrs. Roger Ackroyd. The Ferrarses only came to live here just over a year ago. Before that, the whole village had confidently expected Ackroyd to marry his housekeeper, Miss Russell. At the same time, his widowed sister-in-law, Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, with her daughter, came to stay with Ackroyd, and she certainly disapproved of him marrying his housekeeper. I went on my round, my thoughts returning to Mrs. Ferrars' death. I had last seen her only yesterday, walking with Ralph Peyton. I had been very surprised to see him. He and his stepfather had argued very badly 6 months ago, and he hadn't been seen in King's Abbot since. I was still thinking of it when I came face to face with Roger Ackroyd himself. "Shepherd," he exclaimed, "this is a terrible business. I've got to talk to you. Can you come back with me now?" "No, I've got patients to visit still, and surgery." "Then come for dinner tonight, at 7:30. Damn, here's old Miss Gannett coming. I don't want to have to talk to her. See you tonight, Shepherd." Miss Gannett was full of gossip. Wasn't it sad about poor dear Mrs. Ferrars? People were saying she had been a drug addict. I went home, thoughtful, to find several patients waiting for me to begin surgery. Chapter 3. The Man Who Grew Vegetable Marrows. I told Caroline at lunch that I would be dining at Fernley. "Excellent," she said. "You'll hear all about it. By the way, why is Ralph staying at the Three Boars pub? He arrived yesterday morning, and last night he went out to meet a girl. I don't know who she is." It must have been very hard for Caroline to have to admit that she didn't know. "But I can guess," continued my sister. "His cousin, Flora Ackroyd, is, of course, no relation really to Ralph Peyton. They are secretly engaged. Ackroyd disapproves, and they have to meet secretly." I began to talk about our new neighbour, which stopped Caroline saying more about her romantic theory. The house next door, the Larches, has recently been rented by a stranger. To Caroline's annoyance, she has not been able to find out anything about him, except that his name is Mr. Porret, he is a foreigner, and he is interested in growing vegetable marrows. That is not the sort of information Caroline wants. She wants to know where he comes from, what he does, whether he is married, and so on. "My dear Caroline," I said, "there's no doubt that the man is a retired hairdresser. Look at that moustache of his." I escaped into the garden. I was digging up weeds when a heavy object flew past my ears and fell at my feet. It was a marrow. Over the wall there appeared an egg-shaped head, partly covered with suspiciously black hair, a huge moustache, and a pair of green eyes. It was the mysterious Mr. Porret. "1,000 pardons, monsieur. For some months now I grow the marrows. This morning I become angry with them. I seize one, I throw him over the wall. Oh, monsieur, I am ashamed. Do not worry, it is not a habit with me. But, monsieur, do you not think that a man may work to reach a peaceful retirement, and then find that after all he wants the old busy days back, and the occupation that he thought he was so glad to leave?" "Yes," I said, thinking how strangely he spoke English. "I know that feeling well. I have always wanted to travel, to see the world. A year ago I inherited some money, enough to allow me to realize a dream, yet I am still here." My little neighbour nodded. "Habits are very hard to break. And, monsieur, my work was the most interesting work there is in the world, the study of human nature." Clearly a retired hairdresser. Who knows the secrets of human nature better than a hairdresser? "Also, I had a friend who for many years never left my side. Occasionally he behaved stupidly enough to make me afraid, but his honest opinions, the pleasure of delighting and surprising him by my greater intelligence, I miss these things more than I can tell you." "He died?" "Not so. He lives now in the Argentine." "In the Argentine," I said jealously. Mr. Porret looked at me sympathetically. "You will go there, yes?" he asked. I shook my head with a sigh. I could have gone a year ago, but I was foolish and speculated. "Not those new oil fields?" he asked. "I thought about them, but in the end I chose a gold mine in Western Australia." My neighbour was regarding me with a strange expression. "It is fate that I should live